The Trump administration is talking about finding a peace negotiation, so they're not looking for this either. But Trump has also said, if the Russians don't play nice on negotiations, we may have to arm Ukraine that's never been armed before. At that point, Tomahawks might be something they would consider. I think it's time for people who understand the situation to start talking about arming Ukraine appropriately.
Now, the US has closed its embassy in Kyiv over fears of a significant airstrike. Other embassies have also closed, including those of Spain, Italy and Greece. It comes days after Washington allowed Ukraine to use these long-range missiles to strike targets inside Russia. Let's talk about all of this and more with a former US ambassador to Ukraine, John Herbst. John, a very good afternoon from us in London. Tell us about your experience and inform us as to what would happen. You worked in this embassy building. What sort of air defences would normally be protecting it?
Well, I don't think there are any special air defenses for the building, although I've been out of the State Department for 14 years, so I don't have the most up-to-date information. But by and large, Kyiv does have effective air defense. Effective means they're able to destroy the vast majority, over 90% of missiles and drones coming in, but sometimes things get through. And so now we have these intel reports, I guess, I haven't seen them, of a massive Russian airstrike approaching or happening soon. So I think this is a natural precaution, which is nothing more than a precaution for the safety of the personnel at the embassy and other embassies in Kyiv.
What sort of response would you expect from Washington if the embassy was hit?
I have long advocated a stronger, bolder policy in supplying Ukraine with weapons. And we've seen a pattern since the big invasion began of the Biden administration dilly-dallying on necessary weapons because, in fact, they've been intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. We should have in hand a plan to send more weapons, more advanced weapons. It's ridiculous that people talk about the ATACMS as long-range strikes because they only go 180 miles. We should, in fact, be giving Ukraine Tomahawks, which can go 1,000 miles. That would be striking strategic targets in Russia. Ukraine needs to make this war end sooner.
Right. Why do we know so much about the kind of missiles that are being involved and called in this campaign? Because actually, President Zelensky has said kind of enough talking about the exact range of the missiles and stuff like that, because it kind of plays into Russia's hands a bit, doesn't it? Into their propaganda machine.
It does a little bit, but I mean, these things are not deeply classified. They're not classified at all. People understand the ranges of major American weapon systems, and for that matter, the weapon systems of other countries. But we keep hearing the phrase deep strike because that's how the White House has briefed the press, because they've been intimidated again by Putin's nuclear threat. So people say, oh, deep strikes into Russia. Oh, my goodness. But 180 miles is not a deep strike into a country that's 9,000 miles from east to west and several thousand miles from north to south.
Yeah. The other longer range missiles that you were talking about, Tomahawks and the like, John, I mean, do you think that those will be okayed by America at some point under the tail end of this administration, under a new one?
There's no way in the world that the Biden administration would go for this now. I think the Trump administration is talking about finding a peace negotiation, so they're not looking for this either. But Trump has also said, if the Russians don't play nice on negotiations, we may have to arm Ukraine that's never been armed before. At that point, Tomahawks might be something they would consider. I think it's time for people who understand the situation to start talking about arming Ukraine appropriately.
Right. What is the likelihood, though, of that happening under President Trump? I mean, he made as part of his mandate a promise that he would be able to bring peace, not he would be able to arm Ukraine more.
Well, he has said in the few comments he's made on this that, he wants Ukraine to be flexible in reaching a deal. And he's mentioned territorial compromise in that connection. And he's willing to, deny aid to Ukraine to make them amenable. He's also said, Putin needs to reach an understanding, which leads to a decent peace, a stable peace, not the Russian conquest of Ukraine. And if the Russians are not willing to do that, he may need to arm Ukraine, and it's never been armed before. And right now, if you pay close attention to the reaction in Moscow to things coming from the incoming administration, it's almost entirely negative about the peace plan.
Can I ask you for your thoughts as well, Mr. Herbst, about the kind of people who Donald Trump is surrounding himself with? I mean, particularly the potential of the new Defence Secretary being Pete Hegseth. Do you have very many thoughts about him?
I don't know him. I mean, I've seen him on TV before, but I have an excellent group of colleagues, a couple who've had contact with him, and they tell me he is sound regarding the major strategic dangers to the United States, which include especially China and Russia. So his outlook is, I think, is somewhat similar to Rubio's, our Secretary of State designate, and Waltz, the person who will become the National Security Advisor, who again are sound on these threats, even though Hegseth does not had, the substantial experience that Rubio or Waltz have had.
Yeah. Is there a danger, though, that given we are sailing into such uncharted territory at the moment with our geopolitics, that actually you create vulnerability by simply giving such a large job to somebody who is quite untested, who might have controversy around them? That's just giving ground to America's enemies, isn't it?
I think that the controversy regarding Hegseth is understandable, given the fact he has not had the sort of blue chip experience on national security issues that normally defense secretary nominees have. But if his instincts are sound, he's obviously a smart man, and he has the right advisors, he can do a splendid job. So I'm not going to argue against him because his experience is on the lower side. If he was, ignorant regarding our enemies, regarding the threats America faces, I would say, yeah, we don't need this gentleman. But he's seen, again, I've been told he is sound on these issues, so that makes me comfortable with his nomination.
What do you think will happen over the next couple of weeks, Mr. Herbst?
Well, I think, Putin issued another nuclear threat in connection with the decision made by Biden at last on the ATACMS. I am reasonably, can never be absolutely certain, but he has been bluffing all along with nuclear threats. We've crossed his supposed red times many, many times without result. But I think this, major airstrike on Ukraine, which has led to the closing of several embassies in Kyiv, may be his response to this. So we'll see more of these type of bloodthirsty tactics, which are aimed at civilians and energy infrastructure. Beyond that, I don't expect much. And I would just hope that, again, if somehow any embassy was hit, that we have something planned in terms of a new package of things for Ukraine that will do damage to Russian aggressors in Ukraine and on Russian soil.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us this afternoon. That is former US Ambassador to Ukraine, John Herbst.